All right, Joel Gausten here from joelgausten.com. I am very happy and very excited to welcome an old friend I haven't spoken to for a bit. So I'm really happy to welcome from presumably much warmer than where I am, Los Angeles, California, Mr. Loren Molinare. How you doing, man?
Hey Joel, I'm doing good. Thanks for having me on your new podcast Zoom thing here. It's been a while, and I don't know if it's that much warmer here. Los Angeles is kind of windy and cool here. It's probably about 62, and I'm freezing. So I'm a wimp after living in California for a long time. But yeah, all is good.
Well,
So
I remember when I lived in LA 20 years ago when it dropped to about 60, my girlfriend at the time and I used to put like the hair dryer under the sheets because we were freezing.
yeah.
You're much better off than I am right now. I think we're at about 30 right now. So, yeah.
Is the season here with Thanksgiving, Christmas coming up. I growing up in Michigan, I kind of miss the seasons changing, but every time I go back to visit family around the holidays in the years gone by, I'm there for about 2 days and go, okay, time to get back to California. Uh,
Yeah,
but
absolutely. Well, when I started doing these video interviews, you were immediately at the top of my list of people I wanted to do one with because you have one of the most varied and colorful musical careers of anyone I know. Um, and we're going to dive into as much as our time together allows during this conversation. But to kind of start it off at the very beginning, we have to go back to the 1960s in Lansing, Michigan, and the formation of a band that you've been a part of really ever since, and that would be the Dogs, which formed out in Lansing, Michigan. Uh, when was that? 68, 67?
yeah, it was mid 68. Yeah, definitely.
Fantastic. And what led to the formation of the Dogs, and what inspired you to kind of dive into the world of music yourself?
Well, I had been playing in junior high school bands, obviously influenced by the Beatles, Kinks, Stones, Yardbirds, all that early kind of mid 60s stuff, the British invasion, and had some kind of very crude bands in junior high school, and this was before I had met Mary from the Dogs and we started the Dogs. Um, but the drummer, Art Phelps, that was in all the bands from seventh grade on, we continued. And then we actually ended up meeting Mary. And, you know, she was like 4 or 5 years older than us, but she was this tough ass chick from Detroit that had came up to hang out at MSU campus. And she came over. We were looking for a bass player, put a sign up in a music store. She came and answered the ad, and we were kind of shocked, like who she was, because we were like, you know, pretty naive kids. And she walks down the door looking like Noel Redding from Jimi Hendrix with flaming orange hair, and um, she played like Jack Bruce, um, and we didn't think she'd ever come back. And she did come back. She saw something in us that we didn't even see in ourselves. But we were already writing original songs then, and we put the band together. Um, a friend of Art, the drummer, and myself, this guy Barry Higgins, said, "Oh, hey, look, I can join the band and we can do some cover songs." And so we started that band, and it was called Virgin Thunder. And it was basically um, a lot of covers that was happening, from The Who to Creedence Clearwater and all that. And, Barry fronted it, and he was a good kind of Hollywood bullshitter, got it going. And um, I uh, I was getting kind of frustrated with the whole cover scene. I wanted to play an original band. He threw Mary out, so I quit then Art quit, and then we got married back together, and we felt like underdogs, sort of. And she had came to rehearsal once with the Stooges' first single, "I Want to Be Your Dog," and I said, "That's what we should call ourselves." I told that to my mother. She goes, and she was appalled. She was like, "That's what you think of yourself, as a bunch of dogs?" And I went, "Bada bing. If mom hates the name, it's good, with teenage angst and rebellion." So we started, and we were one of the few original bands at that point around Lansing. We ended up getting to go to Detroit, and we started playing like with a lot of the Detroit bands, and just kind of built it up from there.
Now, when you say some of the Detroit bands, you're referring to playing with like the MC5 and the Stooges, right? You were doing gigs with those guys?
Well, we started playing with Brownsville Station,
Okay.
the Rationals. Mary had knew Dick Wagner when he had this band, the Bossmen, and he actually was the one responsible for bringing us down to play proper kind of concert halls like Birmingham Palladium and Silver Bell. And then we did play with the MC5 right after Back in the USA came out, and which was the most riveting concert I've ever been to since that night. And then we did get to play with the MC5 second to their last gig before they broke up, when they came back after their third album. We actually never played with the Stooges, we did play with Iggy solo in 80 or 81 in Detroit, but and we got to play with Nugent a few times, Nugent when he had the Amboy Dukes, and then Ted Nugent solo during Stranglehold days. And so, yeah, we cut our teeth with opening for all those bands, which, was just, we really learned a lot watching those bands.
Yeah, I can imagine. Fast forwarding a bit, I know the Dogs made the decision in the early 70s to give New York City a try. Um, and this was early 70s enough to where the Dogs ended up playing the Coventry with a very young, outrageous, up and coming, unsigned band called Kiss. How did the Kiss connection come about during that period of time?
Well, you have a bunch of naive kids from Michigan hit Manhattan, and the first day we're in town, we see Kiss posters all over Manhattan, Kiss at the Diplomat Hotel, which was the show that Bill Aucoin signed them. And so we had the brilliant idea, like, well, maybe we can go play this. So we found the Diplomat in Midtown Manhattan. I went up and found out that Kiss was putting the show on, and asked, so I talked to Paul Stanley. I just said, "Hey, my name's Loren from the Dogs. We just got into New York. Can we play tonight?" And he was like, "Hey, man, this is fucking New York. You can't just come here and think you're going to play on a Kiss show." And it was like an eye-opening experience to realize people in New York say what they mean. They don't buck around or beat around the bush. And he said, "But if you get a gig, we'll come see you. And if we think you're good enough, maybe you can play with Kiss." So we got a opening weekday slot at the Coventry, and they came and seen us, Gene and Paul. And then they said, "Listen, okay, you can play with Kiss here on a Saturday night if you go to Amityville and go pick up our gear from we played last weekend and take it to our studio rehearsal studio, the Daily Planet in Manhattan, and you can play with us." So we were overjoyed to be able to go to Amityville. We picked them up in Prospect Park, Ace, Paul, and Gene, and they told us how to get to Amityville. Met them there, took them there, I'm sorry. And one of their groupies or friends of the band had Polaroid pictures of Kiss, because that night at the Diplomat, we left after they said we couldn't play. And Paul or Gene said, "Look at Kiss." And I saw the kabuki makeup and I went, holy shit. But it was glitter glam. We played with them that Saturday night, and Gene Simmons was great. He said to me, and like you got a beard. I had a beard, like my beard was a rebellion to my parents. They hated me looking like a biker dude. So, but Gene Simmons said, "Listen, this is glitter glam rock. Shave that fucking beard because the Grateful Dead are dead. This is glam rock." And I went, wow, once again, these guys in New York are harsh, but they tell you like it is, you know? So it took me 6 months or a year before I cut my beard off, but we played, and it was great seeing them. And then Little Caesar years later went out on our tour opening for Kiss, and that was Gene did the same thing. He watched us every night and told us what not to do. And you got to give those guys credit. The question is, I ask you, do you think this is actually the last tour that they're going to do? I mean, they say it's the last, but I don't know.
I do recall there being a Kiss farewell tour about 22 years ago. So I wouldn't put anything past them. But what I think is hysterical about the story you said, you just shared about Paul, being kind of demanding and we want this and you've got to pick up our gear. This is what, 1973? Kiss wasn't even shit yet. And they already had the attitude, they already had the thought that they were bigger than everybody else.
Well, hey, they were headlining the Diplomat, and yes, they were larger than life in every aspect. I think, and yeah, that was a really wonderful time for us to be there, because not only did we play with Kiss, I saw Joey Ramone and Dee Dee hanging out at the Coventry, because they were like, Queens boys anyway, and this was pre-Ramones, and I'd see Teenage Lust. We saw them play. We met the Dictators and played with them several shows around New York.
I just saw Dick last week.
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
All right, right on. Yeah, I know he's out touring. My good friend Alex Kane from Life, Sex, and Death is in the band.
Yeah, I ran into Alex. Alex and I did a gig together years ago in 2005 or 6 at Slim Jim's old place in Hollywood. It's my last night ever living in Los Angeles. I ended up there was a promoter out there who called me to play drums for this Ramones thing, and Alex was the guitar player for that. So they just came through town here, and I ran into Alex. Said, I said, Alex, I'm not going to hold you to remembering this, but you and I actually played in a Ramones cover band together in 2006 at Slim Jim's place. And he's like, I don't remember that, but I believe you. So we caught up and it was kind of cool. But anyway, so you were playing out in New York. How long were the Dogs out there for in New York City?
We lived there on 2 occasions. Like that first time we went, we made it about 3 months, and it was just, luckily we met this cool Jewish real estate dude in the East and West Village that had all these vacant restaurants. So he would let us crash in these different restaurants, like on Great Jones Street and the Bowery. And, we kept looking around the corner. What's country bluegrass? Oh, CBGB. What is this place? And then he had a place on West 6th, kitty corner from Folk City, where Dylan used to play in the early 60s. And so the first time around we crashed in his places. The second time around we actually had money. We went back to Michigan, played some gigs, came back with money in the spring of 74. And then we ended up renting an apartment on McDougal, right 2 doors down from Cafe Wah, where Hendrix got discovered. And then we had a place on McDougal Street where the Roadies lived. And then that was great because the New York scene was really starting to take off in the spring of 74. We played with Television at Max's. you know, we were doing PA for certain gigs because we had Dogs always had a big ass PA. So we would do sound at Club 82. And one night we did the Stilettos, which was Debbie, Harry, and Chris Stein's band before Blondie, opened for the New York Dolls when the second album came out. And and playing like I said, playing with television, it was just fantastic times to be in New York then, on that kind of pre-punk scene. And the thing that really blew my mind about the New York scene was, and the Ramones hadn't came out yet, but the diversity between television, Talking Heads, Dictators, Kiss, New York Dolls, Tough Darts, all that stuff. It was like, I mean, I don't know if it was even punk then. I mean, by the marketing term, it was kind of more new wave, I think. But whatever it was an attitude. And it didn't matter really what the music was, as long as you had the mindset of those new bands coming out. So it was really great education to be there then.
Oh God, I can imagine. Um, as the further adventures of the Dogs unfold, which came next, England or LA for the Dogs?
LA.
LA. Okay.
After our stint in New York, we went back to Detroit, and Bill Sheets, our manager, says, "Oh, I got a tour booked. We'll go take you guys through, Louisville, Nashville, Atlanta, into Florida during spring break." And on paper, it sounded good, but the spring of 75 was when disco was just full steam ahead. And when you're playing like the Ramones before the Ramones come out and super loud with 4 stacks of Marshalls, we ended up getting fired in several cities for playing too loud and too fucking fast. It's a badge of honor that we'll take to our grave. But um, but anyway, Ron Wood, our drummer, ended up quitting in Tampa because he got really discouraged, like we did too, from getting fired like that. And so we said, we're not going back to Michigan. Screw you, you're quitting the band. And we begged, borrowed, and stole, or begged. We didn't steal, but we begged our parents to get us gas money to get to Hollywood, because we had to get to Hollywood. So and then we hit the streets of Hollywood until we got situated. And then eventually Ron Wood did come back once we got situated in Hollywood. And I mean, like our first gig that we played, the Starwood, was we opened for Van Halen and Quiet Riot with Randy Rhoads. I mean, it was like, right out of the gate, we were like, it was like, this is a cool place. It's easier to survive than New York, and it's a lot warmer than fucking Detroit, right? So
So you were really ground floor for what would become, the legendary sort of Hollywood rock scene of the 70s into the 80s. What was your impression of early Van Halen at that point? I mean, talk about a band from another planet.
well, we knew of them because we were working with this manager guy that had been working with them, but they fired him. So he picked us up because he was very hip to that hard rock scene. And Van Halen had came out of the top 40 scene of San Gabriel Valley. And but they were great, and so I was aware of them. My first impression was, David Lee Roth was a little bit like Jim Dandy, I thought, but they had a real rock and roll fucking attitude. And Eddie was just like, it was like seeing Jimi Hendrix from another solar system. Um, but they were great. And then we ended up playing with them a lot. And I gotta say, kudos and hats off and many thanks to David Lee Roth, because he was the one that said, listen, Marshall Burroughs, our manager, we can get him to work with you. He got us signed to Warner Brothers. So they put us in touch with Marshall, Milton Berle's son, right?
Mhm.
And Marshall was the one responsible for getting us to open for AC/DC's American debut at the Whiskey. And and so it was, Dave was, I gotta give him credit, uh they liked the Dogs, but their audience was a tough audience to open for, man. I mean, it was like, you better be fucking good, otherwise they'll be like asleep in front of you.
I do know when you were settled out there, you formed a real good partnership and friendship with the motels and the pop.
Yeah.
That was the start of Radio Free Hollywood, right? And that whole thing. What exactly was Radio Free Hollywood, and what the three bands together were looking to do with that?
Well, so I just said that the Dogs played the Starwood, the first time was with Van Halen Quiet Riot. But before that, the Starwood really hadn't started booking unsigned bands, and the Whiskey hadn't either. And so we met Dean Chamberlain and Martha Davis, who had brought the Motels down from San Francisco, and we got to be friends with them. And we had met this gentleman from the city of Los Angeles that wanted to get unsigned indie bands in Hollywood to start playing the Griffith Park free concerts. And through that, we met the Pop, and we got really good friends with Pop in the Motels. And I think it was Roger Prescott said we should call this Radio Free Hollywood, and he started the fanzine part of it. We decided to put on our own gig at Troopers Hall, which was on La Brea, which was this place that they would have union parties for movie people in the 40s, and the gay LGBT scene in Los Angeles would have events there back when it was very underground to be gay. And so we put the show on, and Billboard magazine wrote about it, and there was like 200 or 300 people there. And after that, the Whiskey and Starwood started booking all the bands. So it was really great to be involved with Radio Free Hollywood. And the Quick, Kim Fowley's other band after the Hollywood Stars and the Runaways, were playing gigs with us. So we'd write about them and Venus and the Razor Blades. And the thing is like the diversity that I said that was going on in New York, the pre-punk scene with every band like Television, Talking Heads, Dictators, etc., was happening within Radio Free Hollywood. The difference between the Motels and the Dogs and the Pop, and the Quick and the Zippers and stuff. But the three bands, the founding bands that were the principals, were the Pop, Motels, and the Dogs, So, and I could tell you a little secret that's going to happen from that. A friend of mine during those mid-70s days, Joe Berman, that was there in those days, approached me a few months ago about starting a podcast called Radio Free Hollywood. I've got the buy-in from Roger Prescott, Dean Chamberlain from the Motels, and we're going full steam ahead in spring of 2024 with Radio Free Hollywood. And, we've already got, Cherie Curry and some other folks that we got our eyes on to bring in. So, it'll be interesting being right in the thick of it, and then be able to interview, because I think, as you could probably attest to, like when you interview people, you do your homework, but you learn a lot that you didn't know about, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to, because even on the phone calls, to get the buy-in from Roger from the Pop and Dean from the Motels, they were both talking, and I go, I was there, but I don't remember that. And, and so it's going to be really fascinating to just be involved with that. So it was a great time to be in LA, and then it got to a point, to answer your question about the UK, when the mass scenes started developing, which was, where it's becoming punk, we didn't really fit into that. I mean, you know, we could open for Van Halen, we could open for AC/DC or the Ramones, and we played our instruments good because we cut our teeth in Detroit. I think we played our instruments too good for the up and coming mass scene, which was like all young bands, and it just seemed like we were kind of alienated from that. And we had an opportunity. We were approached to go to England through a English fellow that had been booking the band around LA. So we sold everything that we owned and went to England thinking we weren't coming back, sort of like a Jimi Hendrix thing. In hindsight, I wish we would have just not sold everything and went and did the tour and came back. But we never did anything half-ass. We did it 180%. We just dived in. So, and that was a very educational trip to England, you know?
I can imagine. So that would have been really the beginning of what would become British punk rock, and that whole wave.
Well, this was we left in the fall of 78, like November 78. So Pistols, Clash were happening, you know, definitely for sure in 78. But at the same time, the beginning stages of the British new metal scene with Iron Maiden, Saxon, and Judas Priest was happening. So our first gig, we had punks actually pogoing and spitting at us, and then tons of young guys in denim jackets with buttons all over it, headbanging. And it was like, we went like, this is like fucking great, because you know we could play with AC/DC or we could play with the Ramones. So the audience at a lot of those shows were pretty happy with us because we could kind of bridge the gap between punk and metal. But I mean, what is punk? I mean, we were raised on Detroit rock, and I guess if you look at Iggy Pop and MC5 as the godfathers of punk rock, well, then we're just bastard kids of those guys, So,
Well, you mentioned earlier about when the California punk started with the Mask and Brendan and all that stuff. The Dogs have felt a bit alienated. What's interesting about that is I remember years ago, Keith Morris from the Circle Jerks and Black Flag told me that without the Dogs, there would not have been a Black Flag. So it's kind of interesting how years later it seems that the influence of the Dogs, is being acknowledged. And I know a lot of old school punk rock guys who swear by the Dogs and the influence you guys had in the 70s. So I guess it certainly helps when you're becoming an international band by all your travels too during that time. But I know the Dogs eventually get, you guys do get back to California, and you kind of stayed there permanently at that point, right? That was
yeah. And, we had limped back to Detroit, Lansing for a couple months. And then I really didn't want to continue music, but Mary and Ron Wood said, we got to go back to Hollywood. And then we did come back here, and we just couldn't get arrested, And I think a lot of the problems of the Dogs were our own making, because we were impatient young people that had banged our head against the wall in Detroit, New York, Hollywood, London. And we were losing our patience with, we never had a record deal yet. And so we actually ended up going back home to Lansing and just figured we're going to try to do the Midwest thing again. And then the guy that was in Virgin Thunder, that Barry Higgins, reapproached us years later. And in the meantime, he had went as a road manager for the Who and stuff. And he says, listen, I think you should move to Boulder. We can really get it happening with you guys. So, and in the meantime, Mary had the idea of like, maybe we should get a girl singer and be like the Pretenders. And So we went down that road, and on paper that sounded good, but you know, I don't sing that great, but at least the songs I write, I mean it, and I live those words. And none of the female singers we had, I don't think, really understood that. And you know, so we did go to Boulder, and then we came to LA. We had that band was called Attack, and we had David Swanson from the Pop came into a version of that. And you know, there was record interest, but there was still dissension in the band. Mary and Ron was not liking how it was going, and then it finally got to the point Ron quit. We ended up getting Tony Matucci, who's our current drummer, and I just said, fuck all the girl singers, I'm gonna sing, we're gonna call this the Dogs, win or lose, we just got to do it. And we put the Dogs back together and started doing that. And up to the time that I had joined Little Caesar, and then when they got signed, and then kind of took a vacation break from the Dogs while Caesar did their thing for a few years.
Right. And Little Caesar definitely had an impact, particularly with the first album. You guys had a hit with Chain of Fools, your cover
Yeah.
of that song. You mentioned you did the Hot in the Shade tour with Kiss. You were on DGC as well. And Bob Rock produced the first Little Caesar album. Got to ask you about Bob, because we've all seen the Metallica documentaries and got some insight into how he works with that band. What can you tell me about your experiences working with Bob in the studio?
You know, we waited for Bob for almost a year because he was busy doing Metallica, uh, Motley Crue. And so we were getting impatient. You know, I think we could have had another producer and got a record out sooner and had a bit more organic sound. But, you know, Geffen at that point, John Kolodner was the executive artist relations guy over our guy, Mio Vukovic. Bob Rock, you know, it's like, hey, you can get, you know, Bruce Fairburn of Bob Rock and you'll become an instant platinum artist, right? And I mean, on paper it sounded good. And Bob was cool, you know, I liked him because he was a guitar player and he had his own thing, a band that he came up with. And he came down to see us and he goes, oh yeah, I want to make like a Bad Company record. And we go, okay. And so we went up and did a week or so pre-production. He didn't really change the songs on us, you know, because we really had spent a few years crafting those songs. And you know, and we went into Little Mountain. Geffen said, oh, we want to get you out of Hollywood because you're going to get in too much trouble. And so they sent us to Vancouver to Little Mountain. Wrong city to send a band to think you're going to keep them out of trouble, me included, right? So you know, but you know, it was cool working with Bob. And you know, some of the songs he made us do like, you know, 50 takes, which we thought was a bit ridiculous. But the longer we got into the recording process, Geffen started, I think, telling him to groom it to be more like Aerosmith Pump record that Bruce Fairburn had worked on, or like Bon Jovi, and they were trying to change this band that they signed, which was a dirty East Hollywood kind of scruffy band, not the complete opposite. I mean, like Ron Young and Tom Morris put this thing together, and their concept was complete opposite of what was going on in the strip scene with the pretty boy glam metal shit. And we couldn't pull that off because we were too ugly anyway, and we didn't want to do that. You know, bands like Junkyard and Rhino Bucket was way more like dirtbag cool rock and roll, you know.
Right.
So the record comes out and we weren't that happy with it. And you know, unfortunately for us, it was like Spinal Tap. Geffen changes their distribution through MCA, and just, you know, one thing after the next. Jimmy Iovine, our manager, Mr. Powerful, quits being our manager to start Interscope Records. So we lost Tony Soprano being our manager, and Geffen kind of like, even though we had Journey's manager, Herbie Herbert, it wasn't the same as having Jimmy. And, you know, it was a great band that I think there was too many expectations on. Any advice I can give any band out there? Well, record companies don't do bidding wars anymore, but I would say never do a bidding war kind of record deal, because, I mean, we were $1 million in debt the day the CD came out. So we had to go platinum to break even. So it was a losing proposition, but it was a great band. It started to take its toll. Second album came out, which was a cool album, but then Apache had quit, our great guitar player. I brought Earl Slick in. He was a buddy, and that record was cool. But by then, Geffen was losing interest, and then Nirvana came out, and all things changed, and then we broke up for a while, you know, until like early 2000s. I think it wasn't. I think we got together and put our next album out in 2008. Maybe it was Redemption, you know. And since then, we've been to Europe like 8 times, 9 times, you know, and 3 of us are still original members in the band. So,
And I know, you know, I've talked to a lot of bands from that late 80s era, um, who really do find regular success and regular crowds out in Europe. And, you know, Little Caesar is no exception to that. What do you think it is about the European scene that has enabled, you know, so many bands from that era to have, um, you know, sort of a support network in their second life overseas?
well, thank God for the internet. And, you know, it all started when MySpace and early Facebook. And we realized that we did have fans out there because we didn't know what impact, you know, the same thing happened to the Dogs. It's like salvaged the Dogs thing in the early 2000s too. But the Europe thing, uh, I think even more than Japan. I mean, Japan on a smaller level, but Europe, I mean, within 500 to 800 kilometers in any direction, you could probably hit 50 cities. So geographically, everything's pretty close. They love American music. It could be polka, it could be bluegrass, it could be blues, metal, punk, or rock and roll. They just are fans of it. And you know, I don't know what it is about the European and the UK culture, but they just really embrace music and the arts a lot and welcome American bands over there. You know, a lot of people, I mean, you know, a lot of the jazz singers in the 40s and 50s would go to Europe when their career kind of stagnated here, you know, and a lot of the rockers, you know, would go there. So yeah, it's great. It's great. And I think more now than ever, the United States is so big and it's so expensive to tour that you can realistically go to Europe and make money. You know, you're not going to get rich, but you can actually, any band that can go to Europe and break even and have a good time is a fucking success in my book. So
Yeah, absolutely. Um, when did the Dogs kind of reconvene post Little Caesar? Was that in the 90s or did that come a little later?
no, you know, it was like in the late 80s, I was approached by this fellow known as Detroit Jack Waldron, his name's from Detroit, who was living in Japan teaching English to high school Japanese kids. And he had reached out to me via Paul Ill, my friend who was playing with Wayne Kramer.
Sure, I know Paul.
And yeah, great guy. And so Jack got a hold of me. He said, "Oh, I'm working on the Dogs tribute album." And I go, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Well, in Japan, I'm getting these Japanese punk bands that think you guys are great, and they're going to cover your songs, and this album's going to come out." And I'm just thinking, right. Before I know it, he sends 2 or 3 Japanese girls to LA to hand deliver the first version. And I saw it, and I just was I couldn't believe it. I mean, we had the Bell Rays were on it from LA, uh Teen Generate, all the bands, D4 from New Zealand. And then Jack goes, we're gonna bring you guys to Japan. And that, so this took 8 years. So that was 2007. In 2000, Lee from Dionysus, Lee Joseph, had approached me about doing the Dogs compilation album, kind of called Fed Up, the best of, and he put that out, and that kicked off. That, I have to say, kicked it off. And then in the 80s and 90s, the bootleg stuff, like on Killed by Death, really helped on the underground kind of keep the Dogs alive. So where Slash Your Face became this underground kind of cult thing, it's pretty amazing. But the Dionysus thing happened. Then we went to Japan, and then we started going to South by Southwest. Mario Escovedo, Alejandro's younger brother from the Dragons, was managing us. So he got us on Burger Records, and all of a sudden, a lot of stuff was happening. We went out and started playing, going back to Michigan, went back to Japan in 2013, released our own new album of material, Hypersensitive, which you reviewed, I think, in 2010, 11, maybe. I forget what year that was. And and so we've just kept going. So the two trips to Japan was great for us. I mean, it's just been really good. We're debating Dogs wise about, shall we go to Japan or should we try to go to Europe? And we're trying to sort that out too. And
Wasn't Hypersensitive, which as you know, I think is an amazing punk record that anybody who likes the genre, who even remotely thinks they're punk, needs to go out and get. But it's been reissued on vinyl just recently, right?
yeah, like 2 months ago, this great label from Warsaw, Poland, called Heavy Medication Records. And Derek owns it. And Pat Todd from the Rank Outsiders and Lazy Cowgirls, he's a rock and roll brother of ours, and Pat made the introduction. But yeah, Derek wanted to put it out, and he wasn't even familiar with us that much or that album. And then he heard that album and he goes, I can't believe that you only pressed 200 CDs of it. The world's got to know about this. So it's come out. It's getting really great reviews. I mean, you gave it a great review years ago, but now it's finally coming to light, and actually the record release party, Derek had a Heavy Medication night in August that we played, and we played the whole album from front to back.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, because some of the songs we had never played live. So yeah, it's been really cool. And yeah, we got a Lost Dogs album that is I digitized from the mid 80s, that I took 2-inch tapes, made them digital. So our good friend Richard Duguay, as you know, is going to work with me, and we're going to produce and mix this Long Lost Dogs album from 1985. That's going to be the next thing, I think, that's going to come out in the first quarter of next year.
Oh, that's so cool. And Richard and I did a video interview just a couple days back, and I'm glad Richard came up, because it was through you I was put in touch with Richard initially, and also put in touch with Mike Hudson, the late Mike Hudson from the Pagans. And you did have a stint with the later period incarnation of the Pagans that Mike had put together not terribly long before his passing. I wanted to mention that record, Hollywood High, because that's a brilliant album too, that Mike did, shortly before he left us.
It was really cool. I mean, there's two people on that record that have passed away. It's like Mike, and then the bass player, the English cat that was in Rainbow,
Jimmy. Yeah. Jimmy Bain.
Yeah, and yeah, it's amazing. And in fact, I'm glad you brought it up because last Thursday night, Gabriel Johns from the Slamdinistas does this acoustic night, and he asked me to do it, and I decided I've never done an acoustic solo gig myself, and I did. I was scared shitless, but I thought I'm going to do Hollywood High. So I asked Richard, and Richard played second guitar on it, and we did a pretty amazing acoustic version. But it brought up a lot of feelings listening, reading the lyrics, and listening to the way Mike sang. And if I remember, he only did one or two takes on that song, but he was, I mean, he lived and breathed every word he wrote. I don't care if it was in his books or his songs. And it was really creepy, but fascinating to try to channel into Mike Hudson the other night. And, I don't think I think he looked down from heaven, rock and roll heaven, smiled at me that I attempted to do it, but it was, I wanted to. And there's another song, on that record that I might want to do too. Dark Angel was a really great song. It was just me and my Roger McGuinn Rickenbacker and him singing, and Tony Matucci playing like a suitcase or something. But yeah, Mike Hudson, he was one of the great ones, and troubled ones that, guys like him, a lot of our friends and family just aren't among us anymore. But that's why, for myself personally, and a lot of my close friends, that at this point of our lives, like I just turned 71 last week, and you know, so many of our peers have passed away, and it's like, for me personally, it's just, I appreciate every freaking day I wake up. And if I get the chance to play music, I mean, I retired in January of 2023, and I'm just doing all music. I actually started my management company, Plexihead MGMT, and I managed the Hollywood Stars, which was Kim Fowley's first creation, who I
Mhm.
met when I moved to Hollywood. So I managed them, and they got a new record coming out, and I'm working, you know, Richard's in that little collective, and Cruzados and Slamdinistas. So yeah, at this point, it's all music. And I mean, I haven't talked to you in a while, but the last couple of years during COVID, I got hit by a couple kind of health things that I've survived. I had a cancer scare, and came back, and now I'm cancer free again. So, you know, um, I just gotta say, it's just pretty grateful and humble about this point to still be able to kind of, and feel inspired to still want to go out and kick some ass and do what the MC5 and the Stooges, but primarily MC5, taught me about rock and roll being a vehicle to have self-liberation, and maybe bring some 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 energy and clarity to the confusion of the world, you know?
Yeah, right on, right on. I know we've just got a few more minutes, so and we're kind of speed racing through this. I mean, you need to write a book, Warren, please, because your story is just, you know, it's just unbelievable as far as the things you've seen, the eras you've been a part of. It's just remarkable. There are a couple of things I wanted to hit on before we wrap up. The first one being relating to the dogs. A few years back, one of the times I saw you out there in LA, you had given me, I guess it was a dogs compilation, maybe it was an import, but it had a recording of the dogs back in the 70s playing the whiskey. You guys are doing I Want to Be Your Dog with Tony Sales, later of Tin Machine, singing. And on stage with you, because there's a picture as well, is Sid Vicious. So you got to tell me about that moment, because it's such a crazy thing that actually happened.
Yeah, and it's crazy that that was on Detroit Jack's doggy style CDs and DVDs from Japan. I don't know where in the hell he got that recording, but thank God. So we were booked there. It was like before, I think it was right before the Sex Pistols' last gig at the Winterland in San Francisco, or after. I don't know, either or. But we're in the dressing room. I had vaguely known of Tony. He comes in the dressing room and goes, "Hey, I think the Sex Pistols are going to come here tonight, and let's fuck them up." I go, "Really? Like, what do you mean?" He goes, "Let me get on stage, and I guarantee you they're going to jump on stage like Sid Vicious." And I said, "Okay, yeah, that sounds like fun to punk up the British punks." So I said, "What do you want to do?" He goes, "You know, an Iggy song?" We go, "Yeah, Stooges, I Want to Be Your Dog." So it was perfect. So halfway through his set, I called Tony up. Two or three guys from the Mask. They were this little collective of dancers called the Jerrys, and they were just like act like spazzes, kind of just convorting. So they jumped on stage and they were kind of convorting, and Tony singing. And then what do you know? Fucking Sid Vicious comes on stage with his Warner Brothers thug security guard, and he's like, "Oh, looking at Mary's bass and give me your bass." And she's like, "Fuck off," right? Kick-ass Detroit girl. And so he kind of just, like, "Fuck this." And he stumbled off the stage, and the audience didn't know what had happened. Tony, we all thought it was funny, but we never got one fucking mention in any press from that. It's only like years after the fact. And thank God somebody recorded it. But that picture alone of Sid Vicious on stage, looking at Mary, and yeah, so that's how that happened.
That's crazy. And all those years later, it ends up in some Japan release, you know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You just never know, man. You just never know, right? So
There are other bands you've been in, of course. You play with Texas Terry. You're with Glitter Trash for a bit. I know I wrote about that time you were
yeah,
working with them. But I want to kind of bring it up to the presents. I know obviously Little Caesar is still working, but you've been with the Cruzados for a while now, which of course is Tony from originally of the Plugs. The Plugs morphed into the Cruzados back in the mid 80s. So that band is back. But this lineup of the Cruzados is, correct me if I'm wrong, isn't it kind of Little Caesar plus Tony?
exactly. All we did was switch a bass player and tune up the normal tuning and start playing spaghetti western, and yeah, and essentially that's what it is. And so we did we did a full-length record on vinyl and CD, and then we did a digital EP that and now Rumbar Records have released a deluxe CD on Cruzados of the live album that we recorded in Marseille, um, and everything. Yeah, so yeah, at that acoustic gig I did the other night, Tony Marsico did his solo thing there because he's got a new solo EP too that's very kind of 60s jingle jangle kind of like. So yeah, we're just a incestuous bunch of musicians that kind of go from band to band. And then I have the Slamdinistas, which was a artist that I had been producing, Gabriel Johns, like pre-COVID, and then he wanted me to do another record with him, and I said the world does not need another songwriter, LA singer songwriter. I go, we need to put a band together, kind of like Tough Darts, Mink DeVille, Joe Jackson. And so we got Mike from the Blessings, Mike Gavigan on guitar, the drummer from Glitter Trash, Boomer, and then Paul Ill was in that because he's friends with Gabriel. And the Slamdinistas come out, and we've had like 9 singles off the album that came out 2 years ago. And we just came back from New York playing with Palmera Del Rand, the underground garage DJs band, and a great band from Jersey, the Sins with Cindy Dawson. And so yeah, Slamdinistas. So how many bands can one guy be in? At this point, it's 4, but it's all time management, and they all kind of live in their own time span and ecosystem too. So, you know.
you have always, for as long as I've known you, you've been a moving target musically, which makes my job a lot of fun because I kind of get to follow everything. And I'm very excited about all the activity with the Cruzados. I've been such a fan of Tony's for so long, and
Yeah,
his work
he's
with
great.
clubs and
You should check out his new CD. It's called Sleepwalker, and it's really good. I mean, he wrote all the songs. He basically on all the new Crusado stuff. Besides one song I co-wrote with him, it's all his songs and his. I mean, he's played with so many people. I mean, his stint with Bob Dylan,
like,
Roger Daltrey, Marianne Faithfull, Matthew Sweet, Divinals. I mean, and his songwriting is just amazing, and he's just a great guy, and and he's got the jazz thing he does, the Martini Kings, which is kind of tiki music. So yeah, it's just cool. I just try to hang out with people like that. And I go back with Tony to the late 70s, early 80s, because I was an early roadie for the Cruzados in the early days too. So, but I never got to play with him. So not until he asked me to be in the Cruzados that I ever got to play a fucking note with him. But now, it's been great. But we've known each other forever. So yeah, it's cool. He's a cool guy.
yeah, I'd love to have him on one of these video chats because like I said, I had Greg Keane from TSOL on a couple weeks ago. And Greg had worked with the Plugs during the Repo Man era because he was friends with Charlie Quintana. And
Right.
we were talking about, how if there's a Mount Rushmore of California punk, you really got to put the Plugs up there. I mean,
Plugs were fantastic. Yeah, they were great. I go watch their old videos. In fact, I told Tony the other day, I saw this video from Fender's Ballroom in Long Beach. You playing, man, with this pick with your Fender bass. And so yeah, we rever those guys. And it was a real honor when he asked Ron Young and Mark Tremolia and myself, and then Rob Clennell, who was in Texas Terry's band with me, uh, was pulled in to do the Cruzados thing. So, but to learn those Cruzado songs that I basically had grew up with, they were like the soundtrack of my life in the 80s. And it's a different style than I play. So for me as a musician, I look forward to diving into something I'd never done before, and
yeah.
playing spaghetti western clean sounding guitars and stuff, and it was just a real honor to hopefully do those songs justice, and the European audiences loved it. So we have a gig in January in San Diego, and I'm sure a bunch of stuff's going to come up this next year. So
That's great, man. Well, I'm a big fan of that band, a big fan of the Dogs, and a big fan of you, man. You've always been a great friend, and I'm very happy to know you. And I'm happy that we're finally connecting for this kind of story that's just kind of everywhere, man. It's really a lot of fun. So thank you for
yeah. Well, thank you for asking me. And I thought it'd be fun knowing like how you were like, you're like one of those journalists that pick up on things before the mainstream cats do, I think. And you gave such a cool review, and you got what hypersensitive was about for the Dogs years ago, like 10 years ago, right? And so when you said, "Hey, let's do this interview," I thought, well, it'd be fun to chat about like how you knew it was cool like years ago, and then luckily and now it's out on vinyl and everything. So thanks for asking me, and I'll hook you up with Tony because you definitely got to get him on here.
Yeah, I'd love to, man. I'm like I said, I'll probably talk his ear off about the Plugs, but I would love to have him on, man. That'd be fantastic.
You'll love it.
Excellent, Loren. Always great seeing you, my friend.
You got it. Have a good and great Thanksgiving.
You too, and give my best to your missus.
Got it. Rock on.
Rock on.